This is the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Moses Boyd, his biography and best hits. During this summer, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. So we're going to be talking about one of the most uncompromising and influential partnerships in modern UK jazz, Binka and Moses. Just tenor saxophone and drums, no bass, no piano, no safety net, limitless imagination. So we're going to be talking about the albums that established Binka Golding and Moses Boyd as leaders of a new jazz generation. We'll start with Dem Ones, their raw and amazing debut that introduced their fearless approach to free jazz improvisation. Then we move to Journey to the Mountain of Forever, a more expansive and spiritual follow-up that revealed their growing sense of melody and structure. From there, we'll hear about Alive in the East, a live album recorded in Beijing that captures the duo's onstage intensity and predictability. And finally, we reach Feeding the Machine, where electronics enter the picture, and their free jazz energy collides with modular synths and psychedelic textures. Together, these records show Binka and Moses constantly evolving while staying true to the spirit of risk and freedom. And that was some insight into what's coming up during this summer, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashanti Silva. We'll be right back up with some music. Stay tuned. And you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Yashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Moses Boyd, his biography and best hits. During this summer, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. So we're going to be talking about a partnership that has already earned its place in modern jazz history. Just two musicians, no safety net, no harmony cushion, no compromise. Saxophonist Binka Golding and drummer Moses Boyd. Together, they are Binka and Moses, a duo whose music reminds us that jazz at its core is about risk, energy, and the courage to live without knowing exactly where you'll land. So their story begins around 2014 as the fertile ground of London's underground jazz scene. Both musicians were coming through tomorrow's warriors, both deeply immersed in jam sessions, late night shows and experimental spaces. What they discovered almost immediately was an intense musical chemistry. In 2015, they released their debut album. Dem 1 arrives with no preamble, no introduction, no easing in. It's fully acoustic, fully improvised, saxophone and drums recorded raw and close. From the opening moments, it feels confrontational in the best possible way. Moses Boyd's drums are frenetic, skittering and dynamic. Binka Golding's tenor saxophone is seething, searching, crying, shouting. They circle each other, clash, lock in, break apart and reunite. The 15-minute title track Dem Ones is the centerpiece, a relentless free jazz workout that moves through waves of intensity. At times it almost feels punk in spirit, at others deeply spiritual. Critics immediately take notice. Dem Ones wins Binka and Moses the Mobo Award for Best Jazz Act in 2015, and later the Jazz FM Award for UK Jazz Act. More importantly, it places them at the forefront of what becomes known as a new London jazz movement. For Moses Boyd, this album establishes his credentials beyond question. Yes, he can produce, he can blend genres, but here, stripped of electronics and studio tricks, he proves he's a serious high-level jazz drummer with astonishing control, stamina and imagination. 2 years later, they return with a very different kind of statement. Journey to the Mountain of Forever in 2017. If Dem Ones was a burst of raw energy, Journey to the Mountain of Forever is about expansion. Still just saxophone and drums at its core, but the emotional and structural range is wider. The compositions breathe more. Silence becomes as important as sound. The title track, nearly 18 minutes long, unfolds like a pilgrimage. It begins quietly, almost meditatively. Sparse cymbals, gentle sax phrases, slowly tension builds, rhythms grow more complex. The duo climbs towards thunderous peaks before dissolving back into calm. You also hear more melody across the album. Tracks like Redemption reveal a lyrical side of Golding's playing, while Boyd responds with grooves that sometimes hit at rock, sometimes at Afrobeat, sometimes at pure abstraction. There are also subtle additions, such as of extra percussion and electronics from Max Luther on certain tracks. Critics praise the album as a major step forward. When the debut announced the duo's arrival, Journey to the Mountain of Forever confirms the art history. It wins them another Jazz FM award and cements their reputation as one of the most important jazz groups in the UK. But Binka and Moses are above all a live band, which brings us to Alive in the East release in 2018. Recorded in Beijing, Alive in the East captures the duo in full flight on stage. The duo stretch out familiar pieces like Redemption and a chromatic universe, pushing them into new territory. No two performances are ever the same with Binka and Moses, and this album proves it. Boyd's drumming is thunderous one moment, whisper quiet the next. Golding's saxophone veers from ecstatic cries to hushed, breathy tones. They listen intensely to each other, reacting in real time. The album reaches number 1 on the UK jazz chart, showing that audiences are hungry for this kind of unfiltered expression. By this point, Moses Boyd is also deep into his solo career. He's working with electronics, club rhythms, and heavy production, which makes the next Binka and Moses album especially interesting. Feeding the Machine released in 2022. On Feeding the Machine, Binka and Moses officially expanded into a trio, bringing in electronic musician Max Luther as a full collaborator. Subtly, their free jazz energy collides head-on with modular synths, drones, textures, and beat manipulation. The result is a darker, heavier, and more psychedelic than anything they've done before. Tracks like Accelerate Overdose are driven by frantic breakbeats and distorted sax fragments. Active multiple fetish overload wraps Golding's horn into cosmic echoes. The closing piece, Because, flows through Middle Eastern flavored motifs and ambient haze. Critics describe the album as free jazz meets outer space electronics. The Guardian notes that Moses' body is on form and highlights how familiar Bink and Moses' intensity now lives inside an entire new sonic environment. For fans of Boyd's solo work, feeding the machine feels like a natural evolution. The producer's mindset he developed on dark matter now feeds back into the duo. What ties all four Bink and Moses albums together is fearlessness. No genre chasing, no commercial compromise, no smoothing of edges. Just two musicians, now three, pushing each other to the edge of what they can do. And ever some insight into more of Moses Boyd's best albums of all time, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. And you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Moses Boyd, his biography and best hits. Now it's time for some trendy music news. So we're going to be talking about a new project from Daggerbo, the collaboration of trumpeter Eric Jacobson and multi-instrumentalist Greg Howe. Their latest release, The Skipper and Mike Clark, hits March 6 on White Hype Records. It's all about rhythm. At the heart of this album are two living legends, bassist Henry Skipper Franklin and drummer Mike Clark. Their decade-long friendship and musical chemistry drive the record, from the funky grooves of Running Into One to the introspective calm of Tranquil Blue. Even the gentle pieces like Tanzanian Skies highlight Franklin's complex solos and Clark's virtuosic drumming. This isn't just a duo showcase. The album features guitarist Dave McNabb, pianist Mike Clark, violinist Matt Stalling, and saxophonist Dave Ellis, along with vibraphonist Dylan Vardo, creating a richly textured ensemble. Highlights like Jacobson's lyrical flugelhorn on Street Shake and Ellis's commanding tenor on Changing Emphasis prove the record is a full band tour de force. Daggerbo continues to blend Bay Area jazz tradition with modern ensemble interplay, and the Skipper and Mike Clark stand as a testament to the power of collaboration. So if you love groove, virtuosity, and conversation between master musicians, this is one record you don't want to miss. And that was some trendy music news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to talk about more of Moses Boyd's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. This is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Moses Boyd, his biography and best hits. During this summer, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. So we're going to be shifting gears and exploring Moses Boyd in a different light. Here, we meet Boyd as a master collaborator, the drummer who can move effortlessly from experimental free jazz to classic piano trio settings, from spiritual grooves to soulful swing. We begin with Opening Time, the 2025 album by the Greg Ford Trio, a warm, groove-driven record steeped in the late 60s and 70s jazz-funk atmosphere. Then we look back to Boyd's early work with Peter Edwards Trio, starting with Safe and Sound, a lyrical melodic album that helped introduce him to a wider jazz audience. We'll also talk about A Matter of Instinct, where Boyd continues the trio format, blending swing, Latin rhythms, and jazz funk with ease. Along the way, we'll talk about Boyd's wider collaborative world, from Zara McFarlane and Sons of Kimmer to Soundfire and Little Sims, showing just how wide his musical reach extends. And there was some insight into what's coming up during this hour, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Moses Boyd, his biography and best hits. During this summer, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. So we've explored Moses Boyd's roots, his solo vision, and his boundary-pushing work with Bink and Moses. Now we focus on another crucial dimension of his artistry, Moses Boyd as collaborator, sideman, and master of adaptation. Because while Boyd is celebrated for genre blending and futuristic production, one of his greatest strengths is something far simpler and far rarer. He knows how to serve the music. Whether he's inside a classic piano trio, a spiritual jazz setting, a soul session, or a pop tour, Boyd adjusts his touch, his dynamics, and his energy. That flexibility is a big reason so many artists want him in their orbit. So let's begin with one of his most important recent collaborative statements. Opening Time, released in 2025. Released on Blue Crystal Records in August 2025, Opening Time is led by pianist Greg Fort, with Moses Boyd on drums. If you associate Boyd mainly with aggressive drums, broken beats, and explosive improvisation, this album may surprise you. Opening Time is warm, spacious, groove-oriented, deeply melodic. Fort's compositions draw inspiration from late 60s and 70s jazz funk and spiritual jazz, with heavy use of Fender Rhodes electric piano. The atmosphere is reflective, almost cinematic. Boyd's role here is subtle but powerful. On tracks like Her Love Is All I Need and Skipping Tones, he alternates between delicate cymbal textures and gently propulsive grooves. Nothing is rushed, nothing is forced. When the trio leans into swing, Boyd locks in with elegance. When the music shifts towards funk, he tightens the pocket, letting the rhythm breathe. Live reviews of this trio describe Boyd as a wellspring of energy. For many listeners, Opening Time has served as an entry point into Moses Boyd's world from a more traditional jazz angle. The album debuted strongly on jazz charts and expanded his audience into spaces that may not usually follow London's experimental scene. It's proof that Boyd isn't confined to one aesthetic. Going back a little further, we find Moses Boyd in the Peter Edwards trio, beginning with the 2014 album Safe and Sound. This record is led by pianist Peter Edwards with Boyd on drums, and it plays squarely in the tradition of the classic piano trio. Warm, melodic, lyrical. The album is so well received that Mojo magazine lists it among the top 10 jazz albums of 2014, and Edwards goes on to win the 2015 Parliamentary Jazz Award for Newcomer of the Year. On Safe and Sound, Boyd shows a very different side of his musicianship. He swings, he uses brushes, he supports rather than dominates. On the title track Safe and Sound, Boyd's cymbal work shimmers underneath Edwards' romantic piano lines. On Southern African Sunrise, a long, expansive piece, Boyd shapes the music with subtle accents and rolling tom patterns that create a sense of journey. There's also a spirited take on Thelonious Monk's I Mean You, where Boyd balances playful energy with precision. For fans who discovered Moses Boyd later through Dark Matter or Binka and Moses, hearing him in this setting can be eye-opening. It reveals his deep grounding in jazz tradition. 2 years later, Boyd returns with the Peter Edwards trio on A Matter of Instinct. The formula remains similar, but the band stretches out further stylistically. Edward begins using the Fender Rhodes alongside acoustic piano, adding subtle fusion colors. Boyd responds by shifting easily between straight-ahead swing, Latin grooves, and jazz funk. Standout tracks include Samba City, a catchy Latin jazz number, and Groove Swing Funk, which is exactly what the title promises. Boyd's playing is relaxed, confident, and deeply musical. This album earns further Jazz FM nominations for Edwards and reinforces Boyd's reputation as a drummer who can excel in any context. Beyond albums where his name appears prominently, Moses Boyd's collaborations are vast. He produced Zara McFarlane's Arise, a landmark British soul jazz album. He plays on Sons of Kemet's Your Queen is a Reptile, one of the most poetically and musically significant UK jazz albums of the last decade. He tours with Sampha, contributing to deeply emotional live performances. He records with Little Sims, Obonjaya, Lonnie Liston Smith, Ed Motta, and many others. These collaborations matter because they show Boyd's philosophy in action. Jazz is not separate from hip-hop. Jazz is not separate from soul. Jazz is not separate from electronic music. It's all part of the same continuum. So Moses Boyd represents a new model of jazz musician. He's a technically formidable drummer, a thoughtful composer, a forward-thinking producer, a community builder, a bridge between generations and genres. From Catford to the Mercury Prize shortlist, from basement jam sessions to global stages, from acoustic duos to cosmic electronics, Moses Boyd's journey is still unfolding. And if the last decade is any indication, the most exciting chapters are still ahead. And you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Moses Boyd, his biography, and best hits. We've come to an end of this week's episode of Jazz Update, so now it's time to recap what we're talking about on today's show. So we've traced his story from Catford, South London, a kid absorbing everything from Miles Davis to grime and UK bass culture, through Tomorrow's Warriors and Trinity Laban, to becoming a drummer, producer, and bandleader, helping redefine what British jazz sounds like in the 21st century. We talked about how Moses Boyd doesn't see jazz as something frozen in time, but as a living, breathing language, one that can sit comfortably alongside hip-hop, Afrobeat, broken beat, and electronic music. We've explored his groundbreaking solo album Dark Matter, a Mercury Prize-nominated release that brought London's club energy directly into jazz. We looked at Displaced Diaspora, the Moses Boyd Exodus project that captured the rise of the new London jazz scene. We talked about the fearless word of Binka and Moses, from the raw power of Dem Ones to the expansive journey to the mountain of forever and beyond. And we spent time with Moses Boyd in classic trio and collaborative settings on records like Opening Time with Greg Fort and his early work with the Peter Edwards trio. 5 albums, 5 different windows into the same restless creative spirit. So that was a quick recap of everything that we discussed on this week's episode of the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. And on that note, we've come to an end of this week's episode of the show. Don't forget, you can check out the archives of today's show on my YouTube channel, The Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan. So I'll see you again next week. Have a great week ahead.